In sub-Saharan Africa, we are looking at 5 regions. We are looking at Southern Africa, which is, oops, let me go back here real quick. My pen ready. Southern Africa is delineated by this area in orange, and it's what I'm marking with my pen here. East Africa in green, which I'm now circling. Equatorial Africa is in purple. I'm circling that now. West Africa is in yellow, and I'm circling that. And the African Transition Zone is delineated by this area in hash marks. Okay. Southern Africa extends from Angola and Mozambique to South Africa, and it includes a half-dozen landlocked states. This is Africa's richest region for natural resources, including gold and diamonds, as well as agricultural diversity. There is an uneven prosperity divide, however, with Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, and Zimbabwe struggling. South Africa, also known as the Republic of South Africa, has the largest economy of this realm. Between 1950 and 1990, the Republic was known for its policy of apartheid, where the white European minority subjugated the black native majority. This led to separate development and carved up the area into racially based entities. This finally ended with Nelson Mandela's release from prison and election in 1994 as the country's president. There have been territorial struggles here even before the European colonists arrived, with the Dutch and their descendants, the Boers, as well as the British fighting over the territory. We see an ethnic mosaic here from the Boers, or the Afrikaners as they were later called, as well as native Africans, Europeans, and people from Southeast Asia. The middle tier of the South African region includes Lesotho and Swaziland, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. All of these border South Africa. Botswana has rich diamond deposits, but most of its people are subsistence farmers. Lesotho and Swaziland are considered mini-states and are traditional kingdoms. Namibia is the youngest independent state of the region. It is a former German colony and includes one of the world's driest deserts. Zimbabwe once had a thriving, successful economy, but was marred by a bitter ethnic conflict between two nations that make up most of its population, the Shona and the Ndebele, and was worsened by the dictatorial reign of President Mugabe. We next move on to the northern tier, which includes 4 countries. Angola is a former Portuguese colony and once had a thriving economy, but the Portuguese left the people unprepared for self-rule. However, the economy is on the upswing and is actually the fastest growing national economy in the world, with growth coming from oil production. Mozambique is another former Portuguese dependency and does not have the mineral riches or agricultural prospects that Angola has. Zambia is a former British colony and has some mineral deposits. Malawi, on the other hand, is totally dependent on agriculture. East Africa is the next region we'll look at, and this region is home to the Great Lakes of Africa along its western border. Despite the equator crossing this region, the elevation has had major impact, and rather than rainforest, we have drought and cold nights. We also have some active volcanoes in this region. The larger map of East Africa, we can see that this region boasts a diversity of cultures. We have highland Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. Kenya dominates this region, even though it's not the biggest or the most populous country. Nairobi is the region's largest city, and the Mombasa port is the source of a great deal of trade. Though economically successful, the 41 ethnic groups that inhabit the country have made for difficulties in governing, and Kenya is best known for corrupt elected officials. Tanzania is the biggest and most populous East African state, and its population of 48 million is highly dispersed rather than concentrated into a core. There are about 100 ethnic groups here, and 30% of the population is Muslim. Tanzania is recovering from the AIDS crisis and former economic woes, with a booming tourist industry which includes Serengeti National Park. Uganda was controlled indirectly by the British, and when they pulled out, the dictator Idi Amin came into power and kicked out the Asian minority and destroyed the strong economy. Since Uganda is landlocked, it depends on Kenya for an outlet to the ocean. Rwanda and Burundi are the most densely populated countries in the region and are geographically linked but culturally closer to the north and west. Tensions between ethnic groups led to brutal Rwandan genocide in 1994, and the region still hasn't completely recovered. Ethiopia became landlocked when its government was forced to grant independence to Eritrea, and the overwhelming majority of its citizens rely on subsistence farming. Parts of Ethiopia lie in the African Transition Zone, which we will return to later. Madagascar is the world's fourth largest island and has a South Asian heritage. It eventually became part of the French Empire and is known for its unique animals that evolved in isolation. Equatorial Africa includes 9 states and consists of the area to the west because it is this region that features the conditions that we most often associate with being on the equator, such as high rainfall and extreme humidity. The Congo is by far the largest region in population and territory and has a tiny window to the Atlantic Ocean. Despite mineral deposits and rich agricultural land, the Democratic Republic of Congo was affected by the civil wars of nearby Rwanda. Chad and the Central African Republic are both landlocked, and both countries have recently been able to capitalize on oil, specifically Chad, and mineral in the CAR's resources. Here we have the mini-state, which also consists of the 2 volcanic islands of Sao Tome and Principe. The Atlantic coastal states are Gabon, Cameroon, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and they all possess oil reserves and equatorial forests. Gabon has mineral resources, Cameroon has the region's strongest agricultural sector, Congo, not the Democratic Republic, rather, has suffered from devastating power struggles, and Equatorial Guinea, which is a former Spanish colony, remained largely undeveloped until oil production began to have an impact. South Sudan is the 9th state of this region. It became politically independent in 2011. Sudan was ruled by the British until 1956, and as soon as the British pulled out, a massive war erupted. Oil and mineral deposits have begun to turn things around here. West Africa is our next region. Here we have British and French colonial legacies, and we see a divide between the desert states and the coastal states. Nigeria is the region's cornerstone, home to 66 million and the largest population of any African country. It achieved independence from the British in 1960, began to rely on oil production to such an extent that the country's infrastructure eventually collapsed. 80% of the population now earns less than $2 a day in the US dollars. For the coast and interior, we have Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, and these are the landlocked states. Benin is Nigeria's neighbor and has a similar geography to its neighbor Togo. Burkina Faso is a poor landlocked state that is almost 60% Muslim. Ghana was the first West African state to achieve independence, and its democratic and stable government has become a model for Africa. The Ivory Coast, or as it's also known as the Côte d'Ivoire, initially prospered thanks to continued involvement by the French, even after achieving independence. But by the 1990s, its economy reverted into the low-income category. It reverted into the low-income category. The cultural mix has been volatile, and political infighting has deeply affected this country. Liberia was founded in 1822 by freed U.S. slaves who returned to Africa, but civil war has plagued this country. Sierra Leone, another haven for freed slaves, is last on the world's list of national well-being. Guinea borders the 3 troubled countries that we just discussed and has been under dictatorial rule. Senegal is far ahead of its neighbors, with its capital of Dakar and its history of representative government. Gambia is an English-speaking enclave surrounded by Senegal. There have been some attempts to unify the two of those. The transition zone is where the realm's cultures intersect with the cultures of the Muslim world. So we can see in this map places where the majority of the population identifies as Muslim. The Horn of Africa is a sub-region of the transition zone. The mini-state of Djibouti is 97% Muslim, and Eritrea, we saw earlier, came into existence when it was granted its independence from Ethiopia. We look back at Ethiopia again here, where 1/3 of the population is Muslim. It suffers from weak political and economic structures. Somalia is the last country we look at in this region and realm. It consists of 10 million people, mostly all Muslim, and is marked by a desert-dominated climate and political fragmentation. I hope that we've learned in these what we learned in these two chapters has broken some of the stereotypes about Africa that you may have believed before reading about this realm. Next, we'll visit the northern part of Africa, which shares more similarities with Southwest Asia than it does with Sub-Saharan Africa.